Okay, we are beginning a new study this morning, and we're going to be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes, although we're not going to see much of Ecclesiastes today. We're going to start doing some introductory material, and then when we come back, and it'll be 3 weeks from now, we will get more into it, depending on how far we get today. We may be able to get into the book as soon as we come back. But Ecclesiastes, if you want to describe it in general, it's the theme of it is life's meaning. It explores deep questions about life's meaning, purpose, and the complexities that come with human existence. Solomon, who's the author, will be talking about that. He questions several different lines of trying to find happiness, doesn't find happiness in any of those, and comes to a conclusion at the end what the meaning of life is. Actually, he comes to conclusion along the way. And we'll be talking about the historical and authorship context. That's mainly what we're going to be doing this morning, is talk about that, looking at historical background and talking about the authorship of the book, and maybe a little bit about why the book was written and how it came to be. And then be looking at wisdom and philosophical reflections. We'll be engaging in key passages from the book of Ecclesiastes, exploring what it has to say about the philosophy of life, for lack of a better term. The book starts off with these words: "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." The word vanity just means emptiness, profitless. Then he says, "What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun?" That sounds like an exciting, thrilling book, a real uplifting, happy book. It really doesn't sound much like it. I go, what's the use of even going any further? It's all vanity. There's no use in doing anything. That's what it sounds like to begin with, and that's what a lot of people read into the rest of the book as it goes. Is it's just a description of how crummy life is, I guess you would say, for lack of some other way to say it. And he starts off that way just so that he can get into talking about what life is really all about. Because when you look at it one way, like this way, you look at it, it is meaningless. He says, "What profit does a man have from all his labor, which he toils under the sun?" He'll be talking about this more later, but what is profit? We need to know what profit is and have it firmly planted in our minds, what the word profit means, because, and that's P-R-O-F-I-T, not P-H-R-O-P-H-E-T. Profit is a big theme in the book. And if you don't understand what he means by profit, then you miss a good, you risk missing the whole point of the book. So what is profit?
Gain of whatever it is you're trying to profit from, whether it be happiness or monetary or.
Okay. Essentially, it means gain. Having more at the end than you had at the beginning. That is what profit is. So when he says, "What profit does a man have from all his labor?" When a man leaves this life, how much more does he have than he had to start with? Zero. There is no profit from this life as far as earthly things are concerned. You come into this world with nothing, you go out of the world with nothing. But there is a prophet. And that's what this book's going to be talking about. The ultimate conclusion is, what prophet is there? Sounds like he's just might as well give up, because you don't gain anything by living this life, no matter what you do. Well, you can gain something, and we all know what it is. But anyway, with that in mind, first of all, he says, the words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Well, we all know who the son of David that was king in Jerusalem, right? Solomon. Yeah, it was Solomon. But was he a preacher? Typically, you don't think of him as being a preacher. We'll be talking more about who he was and everything. But I think what he's saying here is, I'm going to be preaching to you. And perhaps he might have written it specifically for his son. Son was named Rehoboam. Hoping his son would learn some stuff easier than he learned it. But whatever, it applies to all of us as well. But in a sense, he is preaching to anybody that reads this book. I think that's what he's getting at. Not that he spent his life as a preacher going around proclaiming the word like many of the prophets did and that sort of thing. But he's doing that in this book. And so this whole book is a lesson that a preacher might give. But we need to get some background. First of all, we need to understand who the author was, what makes him qualified to write this book. It's wisdom that's proclaiming to be great wisdom about the meaning of life, what makes him qualified, and what's the setting that this book was written in. And so in order to do that, we're going to look back a little bit. Solomon is the one that wrote the book, but just like you and I were influenced by people that came before us. So we're going to look at the life of King David, because Solomon was David's son, and he happened to be, we're going to see, but he was David's son by Bathsheba. Not the first child. The first child died, but the next child was Solomon. And so he was born out of a relationship that didn't have a very good beginning, and it wasn't sanctioned by God at first. And so obviously that's going to affect who you feel like you are and who you think you are, and things like that. So we need to look at the life of David, his father, we might better understand some of the influences that David had on Solomon, and the conditions that Solomon found himself in when he became the king after David died, and some things like that. So we're going to look at the life of King David, and then look at a synopsis also of Solomon himself, just to get a picture of the one that wrote this book, so we can have a better understanding of his qualifications. If you want to do some reading while Sue and I are in Arizona, 1 Samuel 16 through 1 Kings chapter 2 are dealing with the King David, and talks about his life through there. And then many of the Psalms, he's writing about himself in many of the Psalms as well. David wrote a lot of the Psalms. So if you want to do some reading, there's a good place. Well, as far as David's early life, he started off as a shepherd. Shepherd's one of the lowliest people as far as culture is concerned. I think I mentioned in the lesson a week or two ago, they're the ones that they were out away from everybody else, had nothing to do with anybody except for when they brought the sheep in to sell it. And they were reclusive and probably not the best smelling people, being out in the wild and all that kind of stuff. And so probably wasn't that pleasant doing business with him and all that. So anyway, the shepherds were lowly folks, and he was a shepherd, but he also was anointed as a king. He was born in Bethlehem. Anybody else named that was born in Bethlehem? Jesus was, and it was predicted that he would be a son of David. He was of the lineage of David, born in Bethlehem, just like David was. And he was the youngest of 8 sons. Usually the youngest guy gets spoiled, doesn't he? Or what?
Treated right.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he was the youngest of these sons, and his brothers got to go off to war, but he being the youngest, you go tend the sheep, and he didn't like that idea very much, but that was the position that he found himself in young. He spent his youth tending sheep in the Judean hills. The Judean hill country is pretty, well, it's not that much different from the hill country here, just immediately above us, just grassy a lot of the time. And, in the summertime, the heat would burn off the green, and there'll just be left the dry stuff, just like we have here. And so you'd have to move the sheep around a lot because they require a lot, and they eat down to the roots practically. And that's why there were such cattle wars in the United States, the sheep versus cattle, because the sheep ruined the fields for grazing cattle. And so anyway, bottom line is shepherds were nomads because they had to keep moving the sheep around in order to find a good food for them as they went around. And so that's what he spent his youth doing. So this outline is kind of gets ahead of itself a little bit, but it says the prophet Samuel anointed him as king while Saul still reigned. Now, David was not Saul's son. David was the son of Jesse. Um, and but Saul had been the very first king of Israel. And how did they even have a king in the first place? The people said, we want to be like everybody else. We want to have a king to lead us and have the prestige of having a king and all that. And God says, I don't want you to have a king, but they insisted. He said, if you want a king, I'll give you a king, and here's what's going to happen. And he said what's going to happen, and it happened. They didn't like it, but they insisted on having a king, and God had Saul be anointed as king. He didn't do too well as king, and so God says, I'm not going to let your line continue. We're going to go with another dynasty, for lack of a better term, and it's going to be David. It's going to be the new king when you die, Saul. And so he anointed David as king while Saul still reigned, because God recognized a heart that was devoted to him rather than his outward stature. Saul was a big, tall guy, looked like a king. David was just this little shepherd guy. And but what God cared about was his heart. He's later called a man after God's own heart. And so God had Samuel. And who was Samuel? He was a prophet of God. And he told Samuel to anoint him. You're going to be the king. You're the king. And he did it before Saul, long before Saul even died. He didn't really become the king until Saul died, but he was anointed to be the king. long before, and that made Saul really jealous. And he didn't like it, and so he started chasing after David. I guess this will be covered in this next thing, the rise to fame. He also was a musician out in the field. He would play his harp, and he probably either taught himself how or learned how as a youth somehow. And it would be soothing to the sheep as well for this music. But when Saul found out that he was a good musician, he had him come into his court as a harpist to play whenever he got in a foul mood or whenever he was depressed or whatever. David would come in and play and cheer him up, so to speak. But then he became a national hero after defeating Goliath. Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath. How David, this little youth, going up against Goliath, who was 9 feet tall, and picked out those 5 smooth stones out of the riverbed and took his sling and flipped one and hit him right square in the forehead, killed him. At least stunned him, probably killed him, but he finished it off with Saul, or with Goliath's own sword. He cut his head off, and so it was a big victory. The Philistines were defeated because of that, and so he became an instant national hero. But in the process of becoming a national hero, what do you think Saul thought about that? Everybody wanted to be the big guy, but David was becoming the big guy in popularity and everything. And so that jealousy of Saul, he started pursuing David to kill him. And so David spent years wandering and running around in the wilderness of Judea and other places, hiding in caves and wherever he could find to hide, to keep getting away from Saul, who was trying to kill him. So that was, we're talking about Solomon's father. Solomon heard all these stories, I'm sure, and it would affect him as a leader as well. But anyway, while fleeing Saul, David gathered a band of followers and became a respected leader. So a lot of people knew he had killed Goliath, and so they respected him. And so a lot of them, okay, we're gonna follow after you. So he got a band of soldier or people that followed after him, and call them soldiers if you want to. But David had several opportunities to kill Saul. One in particular, when Saul was chasing after him, Saul entered into a cave one night to sleep there, figuring it was safer in the cave. He was in there with some men. David snuck in there, and rather than kill him, he just took part of his cloak. I can't remember what it was that he took, but he took it so that when Saul woke up, where is that? He knew somebody had taken it, and it just showed. David was trying to show him, I'm not trying to kill you, Saul. I don't want to mess up your reign or anything. But anyway, he was doing the right thing. Saul was doing the wrong thing, chasing after to kill him. Well, just before David became king, there was a battle with one of the surrounding nations, and Saul and Jonathan both. Jonathan was Saul's son that was supposed to become king. They both died in battle. That really was hurtful for David, because David had become really good friends with Jonathan. Jonathan knew that Saul was mistreating David, and they became really super good friends. And that really hurt David when Jonathan died as well. But they both died in battle, and so then David was made the king of Judah, and later king over all Israel, which sounds kind of weird, because isn't Judah in Israel? Well, Israel hadn't even formed yet. The uh, nation of the land of Canaan had been divided up between the 12 tribes, but there was no official leadership overall. It was just, they had a priesthood that that had judges and everything, and that was all the leadership that they had. There was no nation really formed yet. When David became king, he conquered Jerusalem, which wasn't even called Jerusalem at the time, but he conquered this Zion and made it his home, or made it, built a castle there. And it's just a little bit south, just a couple hundred yards south of where the major city that you all see pictures of, with the wall around it. But anyway, he built his palace and fortress there. And so he became the king of that area, Judah, which had Jerusalem as the capital. But then later on, in wars with the Edomites and the Hivites and the Hittites and the Amorites and all these surrounding nations, he subdued them all and became king over all of it. And so he was a warring king. That was what he spent most of his time doing, was conquering the nations around to try to bring peace to his country, and he was very successful at it. But when it came time, David wanted to build a temple so that they didn't have to have that tabernacle anymore, since they were settled in a country. He wanted to have a permanent dwelling, but God wouldn't let him build it because he had been a warring guy. Let's see. I already said that part. I didn't say that David brought the Ark of the Covenant, which was supposed to be in the tabernacle. He brought the Ark of the Covenant. The Philistines had captured it. Philistines were a little nation on the coast where we think of Gaza. The Gaza Strip is now. That was Philistia, and Gaza actually was first a Philistine city, and the word Palestine comes from the word Philistine. So anyway, that area has a long history. But they had stolen it, and then David went and got it back, and they were transporting it. They decided to move it. And guess what do you think happened when they're transporting it?
Oxen stumbled, and the ark started to fall. And then they
Uzzah.
ended up setting it.
Right. So the thing that many of us know, that's that story about Uzzah trying to steady the ark, and when he touched it, what happened? He died instantly, because God had said, don't touch the Ark of the Covenant. It's too sacred. You can't touch it. They were supposed to carry it. The Ark of the Covenant had rings, 4 rings that you could slide poles through and carry it by the poles. That's how they were supposed to do it. Instead, they set it on a cart, and were pulling in the cart, started to tip over, and Uzzah did what anybody would do, reached up, but God showed a lesson. Look, folks, this thing is sacred. When I say don't touch it, that's what I mean. Don't touch it. And so anyway, should be a lesson for all of us. When God says something, we better respect it. And that's the purpose for that story being recorded for us too, is to Uzzah learned the lesson the hard way. We can learn from him if we choose to do so. But anyway, he brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city and established the city of Jerusalem as the center of worship. He built a small empire, defeating the Philistines and becoming overlord of all the surrounding kingdoms, had them all subdued, had a great kingdom going. He reigned, his reign unified the tribes, and the 12 tribes of Israel, got them all together and laid the foundation for Israel's golden age under Solomon. And so David laid a great foundation for Solomon to become a king. As far as his own personal failures and family turmoil, we all know about the sin with Bathsheba, the adultery that he committed with her, and he arranged the death of her husband, Uriah. And that really marked a turning point in David's life because that was his low point. He had a weakness for Bathsheba, and the things that he did, the adultery and the murder, like I say, was the low point. If you want to read David's thoughts on it, read Psalm 51. That's where he's talking about that very thing that happened. And part of it, he says, create in me a clean heart, O God. My heart has gotten dirty, gotten black. Please make me a new heart. And that shows David's heart. When he realized it really hit him because Nathan said, you're the guy. After telling that little parable, that really hit David hard. Oh man, what have I done? And so he turned and tried to do well after that. And he was forgiven by God after deep repentance. He had just gone into Bathsheba became pregnant because of that adultery. And when the baby was born, it had issues. And so David just exiled himself and just was praying, wouldn't talk to anybody, wouldn't eat and all that kind of stuff. And then the child died. And so then David got up, got dressed, started eating, and everybody said, well, how come you're acting like this? Your baby just died. And he says, well, while it was still alive, that's when I had a chance to talk to God, and that's what I was doing. But since he died, there's nothing I can do now. I gotta live my life. I gotta be the king that I'm supposed to be. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about these things, but there was trouble in his family. His sons, one of them raped a woman named Tamar, and one of them murdered a guy named Amnon, and then his own son, David's son, Absalom, rebelled against him, tried to usurp his throne, and he loved Absalom, but Absalom was rebellious, and he's the one that got his hair caught in the tree and was hanging there by his hair, and Joab, who was David's general, David said, I want you to go capture my son, but don't kill him. Well, Joab, when he saw him hanging by the tree, he ran a sword through him. And because he was fed up with this insurrection, well, that made David kind of mad at Joab. So, but anyway, these tragedies fulfilled Nathan's prophecy that the sword shall never depart from your house. That was one of the consequences of what David had done with Bathsheba and with Uriah that he had killed, and that's what happened. There was trouble during his whole life. Well, as far as his later years, near the end of his reign, David ordered a census. He wanted to count. Let's see how many people we have. How strong of an army can I make? That's what was the idea. God had said, don't do it. He did it. He did it anyway, which brought God's judgment on him. But David interceded for the people. Look, get mad at me, but don't get mad at the people. Then David died around age 70 after 40 years of reigning, which was a long time for somebody to be king. And he left the throne to Solomon. David's remembered as a man after God's own heart, not because he was flawless, but because he consistently returned to God in repentance, worship, and trust. So he did what later was what we do as Christians. We find out we're sinning, find out we're doing something wrong. We repent and try to stay with God. Anyway, as far as his enduring significance, David is a central figure in both Judaism and in Christianity and in Islam. All three of these great religions have David as a central figure. Many of the Psalms are attributed to him, revealing his inner life of worship, lament, and faith. The house of David, that term house of David, became a lasting symbol of God's covenant promise, ultimately pointing to the Messiah as far as Christianity is concerned. Here's we're not going to talk about any of this, but here's a chronology of all these events in David's life, starting in 970 when he became a king, 970 BC, and then going, backwards, starting in 1040 BC and going backwards the way we, like we count time, is going backwards, going from 1040 to 970 when he died. But I just wanted to get an idea of the time frame. 1,000 years before Christ, in other words, is when David lived. So now we're going to start a synopsis of King Solomon. It looks like we probably won't get through it, but anybody have a question, anything to say about David before we go to Solomon?
He was still a very revered person in the Christians.
Oh, yeah.
He talked about it on the Pentecost.
Yeah, I mean, he totally redeemed himself from the sin that he committed in his younger kinghood, so to speak. He'd started out being super blessed by God to be able to kill Goliath and escape from Saul from being killed and all that. And he returned the favor by committing adultery and murder. And so, but he repented and God blessed him again. And, God himself calls him a man after God's own heart. So he was a good guy. He made some mistakes. So,
Is this a census that he did, is this the beginning of the traditional yearly census going to Jerusalem?
no, the yearly going to Jerusalem was not a census. It was going for the feast of, they didn't count the people when they went to Jerusalem. The census that was happening when Jesus was born was a Roman one. The Caesar had ordered a census of the whole Roman Empire. And it just happened that a guy named Quirinius was the chief Roman, I don't know, I don't know what his title was, I can't remember, but he was in over all of what they called Syria. And Syria is where we think of Syria today, but then it included all of the Levant, which is Israel and Jordan and Syria, that whole area. Anyway, so Quirinius, that's why the New Testament says in the days of Quirinius, this census took place, but that was a Roman one. So they had counted, when they came entered the land of Canaan, Moses or Aaron had counted all the people, all the tribes, so they could divide up the land and that sort of thing. But there was going to be no more censuses after that, and so David really was just going against God's will to have a census, but he was doing it for his own purposes because he was a warring guy, and a warring guy needs to know who he's got to work with, but that wasn't God's plan. So anyway, part of it was God wanted everybody to just trust in him. Don't trust in numbers. You don't need numbers. You need me. Anyway, that made God angry. But anyway, as far as Solomon is concerned, Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba, as we've already said. born after the death of the first child. Okay, before I go any farther, this outline is gonna go just like what we just looked at with David, but this one has scriptures with it. But rather than print out that, I printed out an outline. It has all the scriptures of the life of David. So if you want to do some reading, well, you may need more of these.
You can give it.
You want one, Dee? Sure. Or,
Thanks, Joe, yeah.
well, we can print one. I'll get keep that. Do it, it's, you know, where we have the original, but it looks like this. Well, we need 1, 2. Yes, just 2 more. Anybody has one? Oh, yeah, Pete will print a couple more, so everybody will have one by the time he's done. But anyway, this outline that you guys have all these same scriptures that are going to be in here, and that's another thing. If you want to, you can read through some of these things just to understand better Solomon's life. The next point is that the Lord loved Solomon and sent word through Nathan the prophet, renaming him Jedediah, which means beloved by the Lord, or beloved of the Lord. So he had actually 2 names. The name we know him by is Solomon. That was his given name, but God said, you know, I'm going to call him, he's beloved of me, and we're going to call him beloved by God. And then he was chosen as the king. As David aged, a succession crisis emerged because Adonijah, which was one of David's sons, attempted to claim the throne before David even died. Absalom had rebelled also. There was trouble in David's family, but Adonijah had gathered an army and was just going to take over the throne even before his dad died. You can find that in 1 Kings. But when David found out that was going on, he said, no, Solomon is supposed to be the king. And so he had a formal anointing ceremony of anointing Solomon the king so that Adonijah couldn't usurp the throne. And Nathan, who's the same prophet that had earlier in David's life had told him, you're the guy. You've done a terrible thing. So this same prophet was the one that anointed Solomon to be the king. Well, when Solomon established his kingdom to begin with, he established it firmly by dealing with lingering threats like Adonijah. He had Adonijah killed. You want to rebel? We're not going to tolerate that. He also had Joab killed. Adonijah was the son of David. Joab was David's general, he was the head over David's army, and the Shimei was also a general under Saul, I believe. Anyway, if you read 1 Kings chapter 2, you can see what happened with that. So David had to do some house cleaning, I guess you'd say, as he became the king. There was a battle at the Pool of Gibeon, which is about 9 or 10 miles north of Jerusalem. And God appeared to Solomon in a dream and invited him to ask for anything. He said, Solomon, I've anointed you king, and I want to bless you. You can have anything you want, just ask for it. And Solomon asked for wisdom so he could guide the people. That tells you a little bit about the character of Solomon, for one thing, his qualification to be a spokesman, to be a preacher. He asked for wisdom, and God said, okay, I'm going to give you wisdom like no one's ever had. But he also said, because you have asked for this good thing, I'm also going to bless you with riches and wealth. And so Solomon became the wisest, I guess you'd say the wisest man that ever lived, other than Jesus himself. And he was also one of the richest men that have ever lived, showing just how much God favored Solomon. God granted him unparalleled wisdom along with riches and honor. Just talked about that. We're going to talk a second about his demonstration of wisdom. But when you get power and money, what is the temptation? To do stuff with the money that may or may not be a good thing to do. We're going to see that affected Solomon also, even though he was super wise. A lot of people,
His own advice.
there's a lot of people that are wise but don't have much common sense. You ask them a question, they can give you a really good answer, but when it comes times to common sense doing stuff, Solomon had a little problem with that. So anyway, in Second King or First Kings chapter 3 had the account of these two women that were both claiming this baby as to be theirs, and what do we do? I say it's mine. She says it's hers. Help us. Decide this. Who gets to have the baby? So he did. We all know what he said. He just said, well, okay, we'll just cut it in half, and each of you can have a half. Now, was he intending for that to really happen? No, but what happened when that happened? The real mother says, no, let her have it. I don't want the baby to die. Well, that's how David found out who the real mother was, because he knew, or Solomon found out the real mother because he knew, this is how I can tell. The real mother will act differently from the other one that just wants the baby. And so that became a famous thing. And then people started coming to him for judgment and decision making and all that. And his fame grew and grew and grew and grew until finally, it's going to be later on this outline, I think, but people from nations all around were coming to Solomon for wisdom and advice. And every time that they would come, they would bring gifts for him. He became one of the richest men to ever live. And with the money that he got from it, he built the temple. And the first temple in Jerusalem, it was what David had wanted to do, but Solomon was the one that got to build it. If you want to read about that, you can read in Kings and Chronicles. It was a fantastic building. Wasn't as fantastic as the one Herod built later on in Jesus's time, but it was a very beautiful, fancy place. And Solomon had been the one to be able to build that. And when this temple was dedicated, 1 Kings 8 says that God's glory filled the place, and you can imagine what that must have looked like. Well, he also built his palace. He built fortified cities. He developed extensive infrastructure. What David had begun by conquering all the nations around, then Solomon had, I guess you'd call it, civilized, or had made it really a neat place, a great great nation with cities that were protected by walls and palaces and everything for himself. Okay, then this is a general thing that we've already talked about. The Queen of Sheba came from a long distance away to get advice from him, or just to hear his wisdom. She brought treasures with her. During his time, Israel enjoyed unprecedented peace and prosperity and prestige from all the nations around. Solomon wrote Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. All of these are what the children of Israel called the books of wisdom. And that's what we call them today too, the books of wisdom. Ecclesiastes is the one that we're going to study. But we're really past time, but there's not much left of this outline. But Solomon had many foreign wives. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000. Nobody in history has ever had anything like that, but they turned out to be his downfall. Most of these wives were princesses from nations around. You know how you've all seen, stories about England and other places where they marry their daughters off to some powerful person from another country to try to make an alliance with that country. And that's what happened here as well. So, but he had all these wives, but they all had foreign gods, and they ended up pestering him until he started, okay, we'll build some shrines to your gods. Okay, just get off my back. Whatever it was, he let them turn his heart, and so they started building idolatrous things. And that was the beginning of the end as far as not only himself, but the nation of Israel was concerned, as the entrance of all these idols. God pronounced judgment. The kingdom would be torn from his son, though not in Solomon's lifetime. You've done well, Solomon. I'm going to let you live out your life, even though you're messing up now, but it's going to affect your child that's going to become king. And that's when the kingdom got divided, and we don't have time to talk about all that. But so anyway, Solomon reigned 40 years also, and died, was buried in Bethlehem as well. His son Rehoboam succeeded him. So I'm not going to read the rest of this. It's just a summing up of all of what Solomon did. But anyway, being the wisest man that ever lived, that gives him qualification to write a book about wisdom. So that's what we'll be starting in when I come back in 3 weeks. We'll get into the book of Ecclesiastes and see if we can learn some of the wisdom that Saul imparted during his lifetime. Any questions or comments?